Marketers are wrestling with the tension between quality of content and pure quantity. The rising tide may be lifting all boats, but is it improving how we reach customers? How do we stand out in the overwhelming and accelerating cacophony of content? Marketing and sales are full of myths, misconceptions, and sometimes flat-out lies. Join us as we leave the echo chamber and find our way through the modern-day content bubble.
Hello and welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, where we try to understand and share the pros and cons of today's marketing advice. I'm Paul Frodge, joined by Mr. Marketing, and for today's conversation, the crafter and curator of captivating chronicles, Colin Jeffries. Colin, crafting and curating content. That is something that continues to be a topic of conversation of whether or not from past podcasts, we've talked about looking at AI and user-generated content. So wanted to talk to you about what we're rethinking today and get into this episode.
Absolutely, Paul, a very timely topic for sure. It's funny, a lot of people are concerned, I'll say, about the impact that generative AI is having on content, meaning lots of content, voluminous content, but really low quality, not a lot of expertise coming out of artificial intelligence. And the funny thing is, I kind of step back and I chuckle to myself a little bit, and I think, we've had interns writing really bad content for decades. So yes, we're creating a lot more of it because ChatGPT or Gemini or what have you, a lot less expensive than hiring an intern. But it's probably hard to quantify the number of really poorly written blog articles. And this is not a knock on interns. They're doing their best, I'm sure. But when they're under-equipped and they're not experts, we're expecting a 19 or 20-year-old to go out and use Google and WebMD and 3 Best Rated and all of these random giant websites to write expert content, when in fact we should be relying on actual experts, the product engineers, the doctors, the lawyers, you name it, the real expertise holders to provide content that we can then go out and leverage. I think what we're saying here, Paul, is guidance against relying on pure volumes of content. We're already seeing Meta, Google, and some other platforms step in and try to say, hey, voluminous content is not as good as quality content. How then is quality content measured?
Yeah, and I would also argue about the quality versus quantity. At what point is too much or not enough, looking at that. And you're right. You look at Google and the latest that's come out with their new algorithms and making sure that they're picking up AI and seeing what is actually generated by humans, what is user generated, what is 100% AI, and making sure to look at scrubbing that and making sure that those aren't showing up in search rankings.
Absolutely. Let me take a quick step back too, Paul, because I don't want to do a disservice to any of our listeners. For brand new businesses, you just bought a URL. You're just setting up your homepage. In that instance, consistent and deep blogs are really important for internal link strategy and those sorts of things. So I would actually recommend the earlier a business is in their life stage, the more they're relying on AI to generate, unfortunately, pretty generic content. Because what we don't want to have is a website that's 3 pages and they're 3 really deep expert pages. What's actually going to rank better than that in most cases is a website that's several dozen pages, even if a lot of that content is supported by or written with the assistance of artificial intelligence. And again, going back to the intern example, is it ChatGPT or is it an intern that you're paying $15 an hour to write? Yeah, it's not going to be deep expert content, but it is going to be content. Now, my recommendation, regardless of where the business is on its life stage, is to answer questions people are actually asking. Marcus Sheridan has a great book. He calls it TAYA, T-A-Y-A. They ask, you answer. And a lot of businesses are reticent to post about their pricing model. They're hesitant to post about margin. They're trepidatious about talking about how their product is made, going behind the curtain, so to speak. But people want to know that. They want to know what happens if I cancel. They want to know how long does it take for delivery or installation or what have you. They want to know questions about, warranty coverage and whatnot. And so if we're bold enough to step in and talk about pricing, cancellation, warranty, etc., sometimes we can get good impression share on Google because people are actually asking questions about our industry that no one else has the guts to answer.
In talking about user generated content, it's oftentimes from a product side or the business standpoint of really just regurgitating things that the consumer may or may not want to hear, and not oftentimes looking at that customer and how they're feeling. We have talked about reviews, we talk about word of mouth, we talk about many different things that has the feels for how the consumer is actually feeling. And the more that we can listen to the customer, the more opportunities there are from hearing their side of the story and feeling like that user generated content will come in tenfold back to us, as opposed to just throwing out as much content as we can possibly manufacture.
Absolutely. I think there are some brands that are really good and it's very necessary for them to get user generated content. Dove would be a great example of this, where they create online communities. Dove, the skincare brand, I guess I should clarify. But they create online communities and people share different things and they're able to help each other and support each other. Procter and Gamble companies, generally speaking, are pretty good at this, where they'll have new mother types of communities and those sorts of things online where they're sharing content. One thing that I've seen work pretty well to boost UGC for certain brands is we often think that influencers on social media or on podcasts or on YouTube or what have you want to get paid. And sometimes they just want to build their audience and get their voice out there. And I've had some success reaching out to folks who have very small audiences. So think of a podcast that has less than a dozen episodes, or maybe less than 2 dozen episodes, and less than 4 or 5 reviews. So they're very small. They're just getting started. That person's really excited about getting their message out there. Well, when we connect with those people, they don't necessarily need a paycheck. What they want is the opportunity to build their audience. And so we've been able to work with a lot of, I wouldn't even call them micro influencers because their audiences are just getting started, but we were able to help them tell their stories and help them sell their unique value proposition and those sorts of things in a way where it feels authentic, it feels organic. And again, like no money's exchanging hands, but it gives them a really good platform to continue to build and to grow. It gives them some credibility because they were on a podcast or they were featured in a video or they were on another YouTube channel or what have you. And it's great content for us to then go publish and again, like publish and republish and recycle and whatnot. So lots of good opportunities can happen there based on not even going out and relying on a bunch of users to do it, but pulling in some people who are looking for a way to build their audience.
I love what you're saying there. You talk about storytelling, you talk about that brand narrative, and looking at, I think nonprofits do it better than consumer facing products. And looking at, yesterday our team walked in the American Heart Association 5K mini walk as a team. And a lot of times throughout that day, yesterday, and looking at the actual storytelling of the survivors was very much an emotional thing when it comes to the American Heart Association. My father passed away from a heart attack, and so it was really meaningful for me. And looking at that, how do the consumer-facing products or companies out there really get engaged more with storytelling than just throwing out all this content that may or may not be meaningful for people?
That's a great point because when you think about how nonprofits attract new giving or they attract new partnerships, really what they're doing is they're telling the stories of the impact that they've had. Hey, here's our track record. Here's what we've been able to do in story form. And so often we as marketers get caught up in the statistics. We're X% better, we're Y% faster. We service our customers on these different lines and we fall away from telling the story. And I think that's a really good point, Paul, that we can step up and through user generated content or through collecting actual customer or recipient or client stories, we can really go in and have some compelling content that's different than our competitors. And Paul, it's crucial that we're using a multimedia experience. It's not just here's a blog post about this client that was really happy or about this person who, in the nonprofit case, we were able to assist. We're talking about interactive, engaging, maybe a multimedia experience. I know a lot of people, when they think about content, they think about social media posts and blogs. Help us understand what we're missing here.
Yeah, I'll go back to the idea of let's call it website development. When we're building a WordPress site, for instance, for a client and trying to figure out that user experience, there's so many different ways that people engage with a website or with a brand, and oftentimes we're looking at making sure that the copy's there. Some people like to read, that there's video content there because some people like to just watch a video. There's opportunities for that call to action in many different spots on the website. So to your point, we need to, as companies and brands, and looking at the opportunity for people to engage in so many different ways, because people are different. People like to engage differently. People like to do it in their own time, and meeting that customer where they're at is crucial.
Absolutely. And I think most people don't want to be advertised to. They want to be engaged in more of a conversation. And social media has definitely forced us as marketers to become more conversational. We're no longer saying, hey, buy, 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 not, Backstreet Boys, BYE. Is that Backstreet Boys or NSYNC?
I can't remember.
I'm going to say
Might have
Backstreet
been New
Boys.
Kids on the Block. I have no idea.
But we used to just say BUY, right? Buy, buy, buy. Now I think we have to be much more engaged in the conversation, which is exactly what you have stated. And we're opening up this two-way street of we're engaging with you. That's why UGC is so important, because we want to know what our users are actually, or our customers are actually doing. And that also brings up the importance of relying on analytics. So if we have a couple of different web pages, to your point, Paul, I'll use landing pages as a key example because they're easy to manipulate, and typically they're not as intense to build as a homepage or another interactive page like that. But we can A/B test landing pages and figure out which one converts best, which one has better time on page, etc. We can also then go into our analytics platform du jour. I'll just use Google Analytics because that one's the most popular. We can go into Google Analytics and figure out what pages, what blogs, what videos, etc. are getting clicks, are getting views, are getting impression share, etc. Same thing on YouTube. If we have videos on YouTube, or if we use any of Meta's platforms or LinkedIn or what have you, we can go in and we can figure out which content is performing best, and then do a little rationalization around why, and continue to test and optimize to really better serve our audience. And as all marketers want to do, better grow our audience as well.
Yeah, you made some really good points there. One of the things I'd like to talk about too is we talk about video being the opportunity now and into the future. And I think part of that, and the research shows that people are having less of an attention span, and looking at just scrolling through things. And if something catches their attention, then they maybe watch it in full or a portion of it. But one of the things that we always talk about and have for the last 5 or so years is that content is king. And that's really apropos for this conversation: quality versus quantity. What content is king? And looking at this whole new evolution of being able to create this content, I would say content is crucial, maybe not king, or the way that you look at it being really evaluate what makes the most sense when it comes to actually what is being produced.
Absolutely. I would argue that it's hard to state that all content is king. I think we can agree there's a top echelon, the top 1% of content that is king. And I'll take an example of a website. Let's say that we have a website that has 1,000 blogs. That's a lot. Not as many now that ChatGPT is writing blogs, but 1,000 blogs is still a lot. It takes some effort to think about the topics, to have AI or to have someone else, or to write them yourself and then edit them and post them. There's some effort has gone into that. Of the 1,000 blogs that are out there, I would argue, based on experience, that you probably have 7 or 8 of those that are driving substantial volume, like tens of thousands of clicks to your website on a consistent basis. There are probably 50% of them that are driving almost no traffic. You're getting sub 100 clicks per month from most of those blogs. So then what we're able to do is go in and we're able to say, all right, the top 1% of content, That's king. That's driving whatever the number is, 30% of hits to your website. The bottom 50%, that's the jester, right? We can make fun of those and poke fun at those because they're actually not really serving a purpose. Now, I won't open up the can of worms that not all traffic is created equal. We'll just take traffic for face value at this point in the conversation, Paul. But there's certainly a huge difference between engaging content that's driving people to our platforms and content that's simply existing, but no one's engaging with it. And I think that's the reason why when we're thinking about content topics, and again, content is not just blogs. I use that only as an example. You could have the same exact conversation and replace blogs with videos or infographics or ebooks, right? If we have 1,000 ebooks, not all of them are being downloaded at the same volume.
Colin, to your point in terms of that content is king when it comes to blogs, that one or two blogs out of 1,000 is really generating all of those views. And I would encourage marketers to go back on those ones that are the jesters, as you mentioned, and rewrite those maybe for SEO purposes. And the search words that may have been used 2 years ago might not even be relevant anymore. So that blog could be repurposed for today versus from 2 years ago. Now, those ones that are generating tens of thousands of views are probably evergreen and a topic that most people are searching even today.
Great point. Great point, Paul. Well, this has been a really fun conversation talking about the evolution and revolution of content marketing. Again, not just blogging. Paul, anything else you would add before we finish up this episode?
I would just continue to rethink how we are engaging with our audiences and trying to figure out if somebody has that magic number of how many videos to produce in a particular week or how many blogs to write in a particular month. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today on the Rethink Marketing Podcast. Until next week, keep rethinking those common assumptions and keep rethinking the balance and the paradox, the tension between quality of content and quantity of content. We'll catch you next time. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If people want to connect with us, where should they go, Paul?
RethinkMarketingPodcast.com, Colin. What can listeners do to help us in return for the sage marketing wisdom and our pithy humor?
They can help us by leaving a review on their favorite platform or sharing this episode with a fellow marketer to help them cut through the clutter.
Well, until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions.